that will see you through all the trials that life can offer. Have courage and be kind.
She'll merely be your stepmother, and you'll have two lovely sisters to keep you company. So I'll know, as far away as I may be, that you'll be safe.
Wouldn't you prefer to eat when all the work is done, Ella?
Yes, stepmother.
Oh, you needn't call me that. Madam will do.
Cinderwench. Dirty Ella. Cinderella.
Whoa, whoa, whoa! Are you all right, miss? What did he call you?
Never mind what they call me.
I'm sorry.
It's not your doing.
Nor yours either, I'll bet. I hope to see you again, miss.
And I you.
You have more kindness in your little finger than most people possess in their whole body.
It was my mother's old dress.
It would be an insult to take you to the palace dressed in these old rags. You shall not go to the ball.
Excuse me. Why are you crying?
Who are you?
That's better.
My fairy godmother.
Now, where are those mice?
They're made of glass.
And you find they're really comfortable. Now off you go, for you shall go to the ball.
They're all looking at you.
Believe me, they're all looking at you.
Where there is kindness, there is goodness. And where there is goodness, there is magic.
I have to see her again.
Are you looking for this?
Hi, everybody.
Good afternoon. Hello, Kenneth.
Hi.
I'm not sure we should call you Sir Kenneth. Do people...
Ken is fine.
Ken is fine, okay. Watching the trailer, I've seen the film, I saw it Wednesday, it is fabulous. Really great. But watching the trailer, I realize, we all know the story. Given that, what's the challenge in telling this story? Because, where do you find the surprises?
Well, you're absolutely right, of course. And when I first previewed the film last year, and it was to a general audience, so there were lots of kids and people all through a range of ages. And as the lights were going down, I really had this feeling of, goodness me, literally everybody in this room knows what's going to happen next. And so the pressure on how does what happens next emerge is really what's the challenge, and that's what was exciting. So, for instance, right at the beginning of the film, the opportunity, as few other versions have necessarily chosen to do, we have Cinderella's family, have a sense of the way her character was created, the house she lives in, kind of fun she has, the notion of that family, and her relationship with mother and father, who, for instance, in that great 1950 Disney classic, are mentioned in half a line of narration. So we knew we could start in those ways. It doesn't occupy a huge amount of the screen time, but it's very, very significant in its impact. It was that kind of challenge, which is how can we make it seem entirely new? One of the things also I've enjoyed watching when I've seen the film, and I felt it the other night when I watched the movie, and it was one of the things I remember when I first saw a screen version of it, was being on the edge of my seat as the clock struck midnight and she rushes all the way from the ball all the way to the end of that last chime, still terrified that she might or might not make it, even though we all know she's probably going to make it. So somehow suspense still kicks in. So in that sense, you may expect it, but you also want to relive it. And it seems one of those stories where the ritual of retelling this particular tale is quite a personal thing for people. It certainly was for me.
Well, as I asked the question, I realized that it was actually a stupid question because, we timelessly go back over and over again to the classics. Shakespeare, to mention one. I mean, we know how those stories are going to end, yet there's infinite joy in watching how the story unfolds.
I also think it's an interesting question. It's not stupid at all. It's an interesting question about memory. I don't know if you feel this. I often quote movies and books where I quote a famous scene and I describe it in huge detail, very specific detail. And then I go back and watch it and it's completely different. I just remember it was so important to me that my imagination was already working. And this isn't just a crazy director's thing of I was recutting it in my head. It's just you remember it differently. It's already, as you're leaving the movie theater, it's different from what you just saw. And I've said to a few people, as they say to me, for instance, here, oh, you've stuck so closely to the 1950 original. I'd say, really, you watch it right now, I think you're going to find probably that's not the case. But I can quite see how you might feel that. And I'm always interested in that, the way in which memory and the evolution of memory affects what we feel, particularly to be these cherished experiences, which sometimes when we go and revisit, at least I have found this, I realize, oh, I think it's okay to retell that story now, for now, and get back to why I did love it, because the real version of my memory is somehow dating.
Well, I mentioned Shakespeare, and forgive me, whether you like it or not, you're linked with Shakespeare. Can you talk about the links that you see between, a writer like Shakespeare, a fairy tale, Norse legend, Thor? I think there clearly are connections.
Well, I think that Shakespeare, if we start with him, sort of going forward and back, he often used the great classic myths of other cultures, whether it was the lives of the ancient Greeks and Romans, or whether it was the chronicles of Holinshed, or the history of the English kings, and so he knew a good, powerful story which had already proved itself over the years. So he told stories, the myth of Henry V was a couple of hundred years old when Shakespeare decided to write about it, but he understood that it had an enormous impact on the English imagination. So it was a story everybody knew, as it were, and then he retold it again. So I think I start with that idea that Shakespeare recognized what some would argue are the 6 or 7 stories that we tell repeatedly. And one of them, you might argue, is this rags to riches story. That is Cinderella. And I think the Norse myths and fables and fairy tales in this particular case that have been written by Perrault or the Brothers Grimm, or that come through Egyptian culture with a ton of different variations on how the story is told, all basically recognize that there's something in this myth that seems cathartic and necessary for audiences to relive, or at the very least, it is simply entertaining.
Well, so what is that then? What is in this that, because you mentioned rags to riches, a lot has been written lately about 50 Shades of Grey and, a woman finding her Prince Charming, who happens to be hugely wealthy. I know that there are people who will criticize this because it's a classic story of a girl, falling in love with a much richer man. What do you say to that?
I'd say that that's definitely one way of looking at it, but I think that the story here, actually, I think in a popular form offers a chance to put a question mark over some of those things. So starting with what I mentioned earlier about finding out who she is, so how did she grow up, what formed her character, I think already tells you that this is not a woman who simply is waiting for a man. I think that that's very clear in the script, and it's very clear in the way Lily James plays it. And then we also have the opportunity to see her meet her prince for the first time, but meet him in the 1950 animated film. They don't meet. There's a character called the prince who we meet. When we meet him at the ball, he's yawning, a bit bored with this sort of wedding contest. Here, inevitably and necessarily, we have a chance to understand that they appear to get to know each other, and it may not be love at first sight, but it's a strong connection at first sight. And we've already presented a very intelligent woman. The first time we see grown-up Cinderella, she's reading a book. The next scene we see her in is she's quoting the diaries of Samuel Pepys. She goes through at various points quoting Cervantes and Dickens. This is an informed and cultured woman who, in a curious household represented by books and artifacts and a way of looking outside at the world, who has a very strong sense of herself. And that self, I think, is not at the whim of mere desire or aspiration. And we set her against, the aspirations of the girls and the stepmother, which in themselves are not necessarily unreasonable. They live, in this case, in a man's world, and they have ambitions for financial security that include, as it were, nabbing a man. Cinderella doesn't see it that way. One of the attractions of telling this story was to maybe allow that difference in her spirit, in her view of the world, to change. And I think it's tangible, really tangible. It isn't just a fudge. I think it's tangible, and I think it works. From that point of view, I think it informs the whole story in a pretty interesting way.
Well, it is a period piece, and right. I liked the fact that you didn't update it and make it hip and trendy, and it's not full of meta references or pop culture jokes. I mean, it's very pure, and I really like that, because I think it's time that we have too many films aimed at children try too hard to be modern. And I think, in a way, this is beautifully classic.
Well, I think I'm not clever enough to be, without being falsely modest, I'm not clever enough to be sort of super meta and outside it all, and also the telling of the story seemed difficult enough to me without me adding layers of how clever I was by being outside it. But I didn't, I guess I'm an optimist. I guess I'm romantic. I guess that, I really care about the girl. I really care about the girls in it. And I care about them being, as fully fleshed out as this entertainment gives room to present. And also I felt that it was just, in a way, one of the most difficult things and most interesting things to do was to present someone who listened to her mother who said, have courage and be kind, and didn't see that as a glib kind of piece of cracker philosophy, but saw it as a practical means by which you could lead your life, even if it is inevitably difficult. It's easy to say, hard to do, can seem trite, can seem dull, can seem silly, can seem unsophisticated, can seem naive, and yet I don't believe it's any of those things. I do believe it's hard to present that in the world in a way that isn't mockable. And so how do you do it? You do it with the shining example of someone who not only has that belief, but who conveys it and who lives it. And we needed a remarkable actress to do that, and Lily James does it, and an atmosphere in which this simple resolve, which includes in her desire to be, kind and have courage, sexiness, intelligence, fun, wit, wry. She can be sarky, she can even be snarky. But the basic desire to see the good in people, to think generously about other people, whether that begins with simply smiling at the beginning of your day and dealing with it if somebody doesn't smile back at you, and feeling that those tiny, silly contributions in fact make an enormous cumulative difference to the world and the space and the oxygen that you occupy. And we set that alongside people who are very clear about their desire for things. They want money, they want a guy, they want freedom, they want clothes, they want superior social position, they want to be recognized as being better than other people, and that desire is making them unhappy. And so the choices about what you might do are implicitly in there, and it was, and also because at the heart of the story is basically bullying. They bully her, and even on the most simple level of how you deal with bullying. For me, the interesting thing about it was to respond with, as Gandhi might have put it, sort of non-violent resistance, and she follows that path, even in a fairy tale, in a way that I think was really interesting to try and bring off, because it's a world that can be dead cynical about that. The film is uncynical.
The film comes from Disney. You're following Frozen. Was there any pressure to put songs in?
Frozen, to have what is Frozen? Was that a film
small,
that came?
Small, indie.
Oh, okay, I think
you might not have seen it.
I think I've heard of it. Yeah.
But you could have had a talking sidekick. She could have burst into song.
Well, yeah, we just went our way. We went our own way. Chris Weitz did the screenplay, and I worked with Chris on a screenplay for a movie that didn't get made, and I knew that we really got on. I liked him a lot. I think he's smart, funny. I think he's a terrific director. So I loved being in the room with him and with that sensibility. And And we also felt we had a really rich mix. You know, we have a fantastic production designer in Dante Ferretti. The world that he was creating was incredibly sumptuous. So the backdrops, the colors, the textures were sensory experiences. Then Sandy Powell's costumes were, you know, really incredibly imaginative and spectacular. Haris Zambalukos lit it with, you know, great sort of lushness and opulence. And so inside that, we were also trying to find in performances a kind of simplicity. I mean, we had plenty going on before introducing necessarily a whole range of other kind of tricks that might, as it were, you know, keep the audience's attention. I think we respect the audience's intelligence. We assume the audience's intelligence, and that assumption involves believing that, as much as I loved Frozen or anything else that's entirely different, that there are some experiences where you might want to just go on this particular version of the ride, however you describe it, purer, simpler, cleaner, whatever. It just is what it is, but it's different.
Talking about the look of the film is gorgeous. It's hard to tell. I don't know. It didn't look real in some instances because there's this sort of heightened beauty. No, it's a magical kingdom they live in. There has to be like a element of surreal beauty.
Well, there's the the art that hides the art, and it is a magical, heightened world, and yet in a strange way, the paradox was we were trying to make everything as real as we could. So, for instance, the sets were much less of a sort of computer-enhanced or computer-extended set. So the ballroom set was an entire four-walled, all the way up to the ceiling kind of affair that Dante Ferretti sweated and fretted over across 6 or 7 months to build with incredible detail. Sandy Powell would travel the world for materials. You know, this dress, I don't know, there must be 15 different kinds of chiffon, and each one was washed and dyed differently, and then they were hand sewn with sparkles, and then we went on, you know, so many tests to work out how did it move, what happened when it went down the stairs. Do you put weights in it? Do you blow air under it? But it was all stuff that we did sort of in camera on set, partly because we wanted to see the effect of that magic, that sort of rougher magic, on us. And for instance, in the case of the ball, the impact on the people who were in that scene and all the crew was huge. There was a tremendous exhilaration. You had the sense that everybody felt they were going to the party. I had the sense the crew, frankly, they dressed up when we shot the ball scene. And you see very big burly boys who pretended they'd been there, done it all, were very teary-eyed when she gets to the top of the stairs and she's walking down, and it's very touching, because somehow, I don't know, it's your daughter or your sister or your wife or your mum, or it's you know, not in a dress perhaps, but in a position of just, you know, having a moment that is a nice moment in your life. It's not, life needn't be about dressing up and parties and stuff, but it's more about the symbolic value of just saying, you know, you are good enough, they are good enough, it's okay to be here, it's okay to be who you are.
When you shot the ball scene, the camera movement is just glorious. And also the scene where they first meet, when Cinderella meets the prince that she doesn't know is a prince, they're both on horseback and they're circling each other and your camera is circling them. Why did you make the decision to shoot that scene that way? Any film, I suppose, but in a fairy tale, the compression is such that you want to get the maximum value from this shorter telling of the story. So we decide that they must meet beforehand. They meet as her horse has bolted and as his horse is on this hunt. So when we shot the scene, both our real actors galloped into the scene. So they galloped into the scene on two horses and then we then played the scene for its entire length each time. So then two real actors have to control two real horses. So there's already a lively, spontaneous quality. There's an electric quality because, frankly, it's a bit dangerous. There's literally all this horsepower. So there's also a lot of subtle moving around as they dance. It's quite, I mean, this looks, it's been embarrassing what I'm doing, but it has a sort of supple sexual thing. That obviously wasn't. But on the horses, there is a weird kind of physicality to it. And it meant that every take you really didn't know what would happen because you didn't know what would happen with the horses.
Also, we made sure that Lily and Richard hadn't really spent any time together at all. So this was the first day of filming, so that what you see is them starting the relationship together. It's kind of the first time they met each other. We wanted, in an original version of the script, she'd fallen off the horse and he picked her up, and we said, well, we think that isn't right. And listen, she's a better horse. She's riding bareback. He's got a saddle, so she knows how to handle a horse. And we also thought that it would be the beginning, the prefiguring of the dance itself. We kept the cameras a long way back. We were on long lenses so that we could be close but physically far away, so that they weren't aware of all of this caboodle, so that, again, it was very intimate and it was as if we were eavesdropping. What that does is it mushes up the background, so it becomes a little more psychedelic, and behind was a kind of green, arboreal sort of Arcadia, so it became very primitive. Boy, girl, horse, land, meat, rawr. So some of that kind of underneath. I know it's just a fairy tale, but you just want that bit to be grown up, that underneath was just this, it just went deep.
It was there, definitely. You felt the connection. Let's talk about your cast, because, you can have a pretty set and beautiful costumes, but unless you've got the cast, it's just not going to work. I don't even know where to begin. I mean, you've got Derek Jacobi, I'm sure he's by now an old friend of yours, so fabulous. Lily James, wonderful, but Cate Blanchett, let's start with her. She's the evil stepmother. She is like Mildred Pierce and Cruella de Vil rolled into one. When she stands in the doorway, was that a Cruella?
Well, she did one thing. It was a couple of days into the shoot, but it was a scene at the end. She opens the doors to the Grand Duke, brilliant Stellan Skarsgård, and Nonzo and Nosy, who plays the captain, wonderful actor, and this troop of guards. And it's all a setup. She's letting him in so that he can pretend he's looked everywhere and then he's going to go. But she opened the doors, and then she did this weird thing with her hips, which sort of flew out. So she was it was suddenly like she looked like the number 7. And I said, it looks amazing, that. And actually, it's brilliant. Why are you doing that? She said, there's a great moment in the original 1950 classic where that character opens it, and she seems to like bend more and differently than you expected. And I loved that little touch. But what I loved especially was with two things. One was her ability to come in and own the movie. She arrives, she gets out of a carriage, she has an incredible kind of silhouette, she has the biggest hat in movie history, she has a veil, and she has a cat on a leash. And she walks in, and then she turns around into this killer close-up, and it's a movie star and a great actress and a wonderful gal just saying, hello, I'm here. And I'm your stepmother, you're expecting me, and I'm going to give you everything you ever wanted. And she does, but with subtlety and brilliance. And for me, it explains why the stepfather would why her dad would get married again, because it's Cate Blanchett, of course she'll have another go. But at the end, when the mask is falling, she gets more desperate, and she corners Cinderella, and there's this big face-off that eventually has Cinderella, who has stood her ground and said, why are you so cruel? And we hear a sense of what her background is. She gives a sense, she opens the door on a fairly scary inner life without playing for sympathy. Doesn't go all emotional, doesn't get all dewy-eyed and everything. You feel it goes deep, it really goes deep, but she doesn't want sympathies. I loved that. It was such a mature bit of acting and non-vain acting, It took the ego out, and it was great. It was great to see, but she's terrific in it.
She is, but she doesn't overpower the movie, which I think a villain can do to its detriment. You have the amazing Helena Bonham Carter as the Fairy Godmother, who I don't know what she did, but she was so great. She brought layers to that character that I wouldn't have guessed could be in the Fairy Godmother. She was hysterical.
I think she was very funny, was my sense of it, and she came in with the same absolute arrival into the movie. She came in, you're in a fairy tale, it's the Fairy Godmother, she knows there's big expectations, her own daughter has big expectations of her. In fact, her own daughter insisted that she have wings as the Fairy Godmother. It was the one thing she said, I'm not going to make the movie unless I have wings, so we had to talk Sandy Powell around about that. And but then she comes in and she seizes it. You feel she loves Cinderella, and you feel that she's fantastically keen as a fairy godmother. She had a wonderful relish for what she does. She just doesn't have all the skills. She hasn't been on all the courses, and she just doesn't have all the pumpkin work sorted out, and she's improvisational. And indeed, the scenes were a bit improvised as well. And this, she gives you the sense of the clock ticking, so there's that sort of suspense under it, but this determination to have fun as she goes. She is interested in everything she does because she hasn't done it before. And then at the end, as she says goodbye to Cinderella, you see her move forward towards the coach with such a sort of poignant look. You really feel her maternal concern for her, and it's very touching, I think. So she, like Kate, she managed to have the fun, but also convey the humanity that's surprising. It's surprising. You were asking earlier, why do we tell these stories? It's a fairy godmother, but there are human dynamics in there that we just recognize, and God knows we'd love somebody like that in our lives.
Your two main actors, Lily James and Richard Madden? Is it Richard?
Richard Madden, yeah.
He was in Game of Thrones, apparently. And I just outed myself as a non-Game of Thrones fan. And she is in Downton Abbey, which I do watch, funnily enough.
Very good. Excellent.
Did you turn to television to look for your actors, or did they just happen to be part of the people who walked through the door on audition day?
They were part of the process. That was a long one of trying to find. We knew that even with the greatness of Kate and Helena and Derek and Stellan, that the movie rested on these two people and on her particularly. And they had, in a way, the most difficult jobs because they could be easily the ciphers instead of carrying the emotional weight of the movie and doing so lightly. So it was a tall order because inevitably they were going to be young and probably less well known. But I think the biggest advantage that we enjoyed from their great work in both those shows was that they had practice in front of a camera. Lily James had just spent 2 years sort of every day at work with Maggie Smith as someone to watch, or Penelope Wilton. That's good training, I think. And very familiar with tough schedules, the whole corset game, all of that caboodle. And Richard, 3 seasons in Game of Thrones, slightly unfortunate time at a wedding in that show, which we hoped to change for him. But he had the same thing of tremendous practice for all their youth. They had experience that meant that in big sets with lots of crowds and lots of pressure, they were not so they weren't overwhelmed, and that was an extremely helpful element to their experience. But it was for their individual talents that they were in our picture.
You couldn't find a role for yourself? I mean, you could have played the Duke, could have put on a bit of old age makeup and played the King.
That's very kind of you. Possibly no makeup required there, but we did have the great Stellan Skarsgård and the great Derek Jacobi. So I knew that I was not only going to be watching people who would do a wonderful, wonderful job, but that I wouldn't have to get up quite so early to squeeze myself into those trousers. There are a lot for the corsets are difficult, but the tight trousers for the boys also have their challenges, and or so they told me. And so I knew that I had, in this case, enough to do, and I was happy to do what I was doing.
I'm sure you had a lot to worry about. This film, does it have more special effects than something like Thor? I mean, this is the kind of film that you're striving for reality, as you said, but I'm sure it's chock-a-block with special effects.
We hit it a lot more, I must say. We hit a lot more of what we were doing. But I think probably in terms of the shot count, it was probably about the same, actually. But just because we were more conspicuously riding horses across a rainbow bridge in space, you were more aware of it in Thor with flying hammers, etc. But yeah, there were many embellishments, yes. But still, we were out in a real meadow at the front. We really built her real house outside at the back of Pinewood Studios. We went in that scene in the forest. We went to a real part of Windsor Great Park, which is really the Queen's back garden at Windsor Castle. And
wait, it's my back garden.
Your back garden as well, my back garden as well. Or at least we get to walk in it, don't we? But what I loved about that was those trees that you see them marching around on the horseback in are amongst the oldest trees in England. So something like 650 years old. The the oldest has been put out. So I took great pleasure in saying to both of them, it is a magical place. Just bear in mind, when you think about how magical, that these trees were here before Shakespeare was born. That's a very, for me, that was quite a thought, because you were in a very ancient and beautiful place.
The total aside, but I do live, I mean, my family is from that area, and every time I drive to Windsor through the Great Park, I marvel at the trees.
Yeah.
They are something to be seen.
It's amazing. You get that little thrill of Henry VIII, so we did a stag hunt. Our prince was hunting, and these were the trees amongst which the real Henry VIII was chasing deer back in,
There is a big, exciting chase scene in the film when she's escaping from the ball. It was fantastic, the way everything slowly comes back, and like you said, very suspenseful. Is she going to make it, even though you know she will? As a director, talk me through directing a scene like that, which is computer generated. How much, what is your role in that? Because it looks fabulous and the actors are there. I don't even understand how you do it, frankly.
Well, thank you. And you start many months ahead. It's a head-scratchy moment. What happens is you're a storyboard artist and I'm me, and we sit either side of my desk, and I say, okay, so here's the first shot. Close up on the clock. And then we'll tilt down and find her running through the garden. That's the first one. And frankly, sometimes that's as far as you get, because you've got to work out, well, where is the clock tower? Where's the garden? Is it a real garden? Is it a bit of a real garden? Have we found the bit of the real garden? Should we just make the garden? And then someone says, no, you can't do that. It costs too much money. If you make the garden, you'll have to... So we'll find the real garden. And then over months and months, for instance, that you have a coach. You decide that you'll have a real coach that will really be pulled by real horses in a real forest. So you have that ability, but you know that no animals were harmed in the making of this picture. You know that no goose that you train as carefully as you might is going to be able to drive that coach. So at some stage, you're going to have to cheat on that. And you're going to have to cheat when the horses turn back into mice. But basically, you storyboard every section and every frame you analyze to work out what is real and what is not. And then, of course, as time goes on, you get a better idea. You start shooting some of the film, and 2 weeks in, you go, that bit in the chase scene, we should do the other thing now because he's so funny. But we've ordered the piece of equipment that means that he does the flip and the stuntman. Well, we're going to have to change it. Oh, my God, let's go back to the budget. That'll have to change. It's a bit of a suck it and see thing in that instance. But you're basically trying to plan and plan and plan and allow enough room for spontaneity. And it sometimes becomes very, very mechanical, but on the way, of course, you animate that storyboard so everybody gets a sense of how it might be, and you put music to it and everything, and you build it up from little acorns, and then work out how to break it all down again.
It looked good. I want to know, though, the lizard who becomes the footman. How did you cast that man? Did you put out a casting call for a man that looked like a lizard? What does that actor think when he's cast in that part?
Well, I don't know if anybody here has seen the play that the National Theatre of Great Britain did called One Man and Two Governors. It played in New York with the great James Corden. It was very, very funny. Well, in that production, there was a very funny running gag of an old man who runs this hotel. And during the course of this farcical action, he keeps being thrown down a set of stairs. And when I went to see the play, I saw this display of physical comedy that I thought was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. This man fell down the stairs so many ways that A, you thought he was going to hurt himself, B, it was so incredibly inventive, he seemed to be made of rubber, and it was just a phenomenal feat of physical comedy and sort of dexterity and brilliance. And his name is Tom Eben, and I remember we came to who could be a great lizard. I said, the guy from One Man, Two Governors. He's just brilliant. He's brilliant. And so and it was a curious thing to audition for, because people come in and obviously when you've done the CGI, they're going to be lizards. So, but at some point on the way back, they'll be half lizard, half man. So we'll need them. So when they came in, the audition was we'd be in a room like this, and I'd say, you can start now. You can be your lizard. And he was very gamely moving around like a lizard. Same with Gareth, who played the goose. A lot of strange moments as we just watched the lizard happening. And of course, lizards are often quite still and don't do much. The one in our picture is something of a lazy lizard, but when he does move, he's very arresting. And Tom did that with a lot of brilliance. So that's where he came from.
Interesting. Time for some questions from the audience, please. Gentleman at the back.
I'll move to this empty seat. Sir Kenneth, will you talk about making a film based on a play, the similarities, the differences, and the difficulties?
A film based on a play is, I suppose that the difficulties are to what extent you wish to simply capture the play, whether it feels like a photographed version of the play and you may go with some very contained version of it. We made a film of the play Sleuth, which was a second movie version of that, and we chose to be quite sort of interior and internal with a screenplay by Harold Pinter, who I think kept it in spirit close to what the original Anthony Schaffer play was. At other moments, I think you can choose to be very, very open and very wide-ranging with the way you may translate it. So I suppose the key decision is how bold do you dare be, and is everybody happy about that? And i.e. the author, if they're still alive, and then I suppose the challenge is determining whether you feel there is a film language for sections in a play that may be mainly inevitably dialogue, or whether you choose to retain most of that, or whether, as I've often found, particularly with the Shakespeare adaptations, can you find a cinematic language where words, and many words, become absolutely linked to the visuals in some necessary way, rather than simply photographing people talking, when perhaps you might prefer to do it in another medium. So I suppose the answer is you just try and find the most honest reason for why you want to do it. And I think usually the translation that expands it into the other medium, not expands, the translation into the other medium that lives in the other medium excitingly, I think is the way to go. So trying to find your honest way to do it in another place rather than simply doing the play in the theatre. Thank you.
Next question.
Hi, thank you for joining us today. I was curious, as someone who came up in his career as a Shakespeare actor and had done many movies that are sort of elevated linguistically, is that something that you sort of are drawn to, or is that something that sort of lands in your lap as somebody who does that very well? And sort of going off that, do you see in the future any big Shakespeare movies coming out like that have the impact and the sort of notoriety as Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet? I know obviously other movies have come out since then, but nothing sort of as big and culturally impactful. Or do you think we're kind of culturally not as elevated to that level anymore and would like something a little bit simpler these days?
Well, it's an interesting question. The answer to the first part of that is that yes, I guess I'm a words man, and I'm drawn to words, and I like that. I read a lot, and I enjoy words and novels, and I enjoy acting. You know, I mean, watching acting and appreciating acting, which can come in many forms. But I enjoy great writing, and so yes, often that stuff comes to me because people may assume that they know that I have the passion for it, and sometimes they may think I'm good at it. In terms of that question about Shakespeare, I think it's an interesting one. I remember seeing Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet in '96 when it came out in Boston, and it was a room absolutely packed with teenage girls. It was like a riot. It was a riot. It was fantastic. Were you there? Well, it was so exciting. Now I have to say, quite a lot of that I think was to do with the sex appeal of Leonardo DiCaprio. And this really brilliant treatment, I thought, by Baz Luhrmann, to refer to your question. He took such a bold stance with that. For some people, too much. But I thought from the early moments of putting the word sword on those guns already made me feel I'm in such safe, imaginative hands. And this is a happening. This film is a happening. It's exciting and it's electric. It's dangerous. He's being bold and he's being respectful but irreverent at one and the same time. And I remember when I first was introduced to Romeo and Juliet, our teacher said before the beginning of the lesson, where little did we know we were going to study that play, he said to our class of 15-year-olds, "Who's interested in sex and violence?" And we all sort of blushed a bit, and he said, "Oh, I see, so you all are. Right, let's pull out Romeo and Juliet, please." And then we went, "What? Oh, we're so cheated. Why? That's not right. This is just fusty old schmushty." But in that case, sex and violence were part of that. I think it's an interesting question about whether, that kind of thing, let's put it this way, a play with lots of words in, is something that here in 2015 will always be possible to be done, but it needs another great piece of culturally zingy casting or sort of synchronicity between great filmmaker, terrific young actors, the play just hitting the zeitgeist right in the center. There was a real sweet spot that it hit there. I think if that happens, maybe that's always been necessary, then I think anything's possible.
We have one last question here.
Hi, I just wanted to let you know that you were so perfectly evil in Jack Ryan that I didn't even recognize you for like the first third of the movie. I love that. But I'm a fan, I'm a big fan, and you know, ever since Dead Again, which I think you should revisit doing perhaps another supernatural thriller, because I really enjoyed that a lot. But you know, you've done such a wide array of films as a director, from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to obviously, you know, the Shakespeare pieces in Cinderella. Is there any particular like material, like you were talking about, things that you have not been able to done, like for example the Chris White film, that you just have to do as a director, that you just sort of is on the horizon, or what have you?
Well, thank you, and I suppose being a director, and maybe it's from being an actor, you know, to some extent we're all beggars, you know, and life changes in this business, and you're aware sometimes there's an area of opportunity, you get a bit of heat sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's easier to knock on a door and say, would you like to do a film musical version of Love's Labour's Lost? Then you make it and people don't go. It's much harder to knock on the door and say, would you like to do a film version of something else? They say, well, that one died, so we're not going to. So, you know, one's aware that there's a tide in the affairs of men, as Shakespeare would put it. And so I have sort of passion projects always. And, you know, if somebody knocked on the door and said, you know what, stop there. Here's $100 million. All we want you to do is make Shakespeare films for the rest of your life. I'd be tempted to say, thank you very much, but I suspect that's not going to happen. Please take my number, by the way, if anybody wants to call and make that call. But meantime, I switch between stories that I try to develop, and have often developed things that just haven't got made or can't get made. You spend a long time, often years, and you run up against a brick wall. It just isn't meant to happen. And then sometimes you're lucky enough to get the surprise, which is the call from Disney saying, what about Cinderella? And it sort of really lights something up in you. I enjoy that surprise and the response, which Peter Brook referred to as the uninformed hunch that you're going to have a good time doing this, or it might be right for you, or just simply you can't articulate why you want to do it, you're drawn to it. So I try and stay open to those kind of things so that I'm surprised and inspired by them, and I sort of quietly get on with my own obsessive little things and look for that moment when it's long enough after they saw, as it were, Love's Labour's Lost, you can knock on the door and maybe you can sneak something in that seems a little more ambitious or maybe not so commercial that you still feel equally passionate about. So those are all being lined up, including the thing that I particularly would like to do, sounds weird, I would like to make a horror film. I'd like to make a great horror film. That's what I'd like to do. So very hard to do. Very hard to do.
Well, whatever it is, whatever you make next, I'm sure it will inspire and entertain us and challenge us too. I hope so. I know we all really look forward to seeing it, and hopefully you will come back and tell us all about it.
Thank you very much. Thanks,
so
everyone.
Kenneth Branagh, thank you.